Welcome to CPAC Now, America Uncanceled. Tonight we have a great congressman from the state of Georgia, which has kind of broken my heart over the course of the last year, Barry Laddermilk, who has a great, outstanding ACU record.
Matt, but you're not a University of Georgia fan, football fan, so you
Definitely
should be
not.
You're fine. You should be fine.
I'm a fan of the number 5 team. Okay, let's just make that clear.
The Fighting Irish. But we also are being joined by our ACU board member, Gordon Chang. He joins us to discuss the power play that China is mounting. I got to tell you, Matt, between what's happening with the Olympics and then Biden deciding to move forward with the diplomatic boycott, which I simply think is not enough because obviously they want our athletes. They don't necessarily want our diplomats. It'll be interesting to see what China does and how China responds.
Yeah, I mean, I view the diplomatic boycott as too cute. And I think, look, we either make a decision if we're going to say that sports is sports and it shouldn't have anything to do with politics. That could be one way to approach it. But the other way to approach it is that when you're engaged in mass extermination of the Uyghurs, and when you are taking over Hong Kong, and when you're saber rattling against Taiwan, and when you're the single biggest force for aggression and communism on the globe, maybe we shouldn't do it.
So I do also want to pick your brain because you know what December 27th is, right?
Yeah, it's 2 days after Christmas.
No, come on, seriously.
It's a couple days before the New Year.
You're being a pain. It's my birthday. But more importantly, it's when the vaccine mandate on these private companies goes into place in New York City. Thank you, Mayor Bill de Blasio, for this ridiculous birthday gift. Are you serious? Yeah. I can't believe it. So the guy's going out of power. The next mayor, Mayor Eric Adams, is going into power, I think in the beginning of the year. And yet de Blasio, just to throw it out there, says, all right, private companies, vaccine mandate for all. Talk about an enormous amount of stress and pressure on this already broken city, on this city that has suffered tremendous economic loss. And yet they're piling on these private companies that we've seen have suffered tremendously because of the pandemic and because of the lockdowns and now vaccine mandates.
Yeah, no, it's true. And we have this problem where we don't have the employees we need to drive the economy. I mean, even for us and just the little things you do around Christmas, we're having trouble getting all the supplies we need to, get our house ready. Buying Christmas presents is really difficult. We have this massive supply chain issue, which partly is fueled by not having the employees we need to get in there and move the goods. Now, it won't be the end of the world for the American people if they have a few less Christmas presents, but think about if they're the staples of life and people that live on the edge and when prices go up so much. So, there's nothing good that comes out of the vaccine mandate because the mandates haven't worked. The mask mandates haven't worked. The vaccine mandates haven't worked. The fact is the Chinese cooked up one hell of a stinky virus, and it is wreaked havoc on the globe and in our country. And what we have to do is not turn on each other. What we have to do is turn on them.
That's right.
And work with each other and be tolerant of each other. I agree with people who say, you're not going to force someone into a vaccine. You can talk them into it, and they can make up their mind as to whether they think it's good for them or not. And I think that's what America's all about.
But we believe in freedom, and I think you're going to see a lot more of these lawsuits continuing to occur. We know Biden his administration has already lost several of these lawsuits on the vaccine mandate.
Remember, we've been meeting a lot with Stephen Miller at America First Legal.
Why you just smacked me like that?
I bet it nicely because it's going to be
Try
your
to
birthday.
wake me up. Okay.
Then we've started the First Amendment Fund here at CPAC to raise money for people who get canceled. So our view on the vaccine is you shouldn't lose your job over getting it or not getting it.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be kicked out of something because you either got it or didn't get it. And of course, the most common sense reform would be taking into account the natural immunity built up from, getting Chinese corona and beating it. So we'll put the information on the screen on how you can contribute to the First Amendment Fund. The money's coming in vigorously to take care of these Americans who are being canceled simply because of their political views, including their views on this Chinese-created virus.
And you like to call it Chinese corona.
Because that's what it is.
I'm so glad you're back because I was by myself all week last week. It was very lonely
and
here
the show's
in CPAC
got really
now.
Good ratings.
We are getting great ratings. We have so many viewers. Please share what we're doing here at CPAC. I mean, we cannot wait for the CPAC conference in Orlando, February 26th through the 28th, 27th. Thank you. And you can go to conservative.org to get your tickets. Get them now. I mean, we are going to have a tremendous event, and I think Americans are ready to not only be, what do we say? Not only uncanceled, but unwoken, and reawaken, right?
There you go.
Okay, perfect. Well, now stay
with us.
Go
to the website, get your tickets, student tickets as low as $50.
Oh my goodness. Okay, but next we've got Congressman Barry Loudermilk. Loudermilk, that's a great name. He's got a 96% ACU rating, going to talk a lot about the economy, gives us a good analysis on inflation, so stay with us.
Welcome back to CPAC Now, America Uncanceled. We're joined once again by Gordon Chang. Gordon is the author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. Gordon is a member of our board here at CPAC and a wonderful friend. Gordon, how are you today?
I'm fine, Matt, and thank you so much.
Okay, so there's a lot happening around the world. Let's start with China. Interesting news about how the Chinese economy has been spurred by a real estate nonstop go-go boom, and talk that that's coming to an end with some insolvencies. What's your take on the economic situation in China?
Well, first of all, the Chinese economy itself is stagnating. If there's growth, it's very little at all, and it's certainly not enough to cover the debt. The debt is a problem because we're seeing some pretty big Chinese companies hit the wall, especially Evergrande, which was the largest property developer in China. It has about $310 billion in debt. Yesterday, it was not able to make an $83.5 million coupon payment at the end of its grace period, which means that offshore lenders can now start to call a default. They very well may not do that, Matt, because the Chinese government will put a lot of pressure on them. But obviously, the property sector is in really serious trouble. That is about 25 to 30% of China's gross domestic product. About 70 to 80% of the wealth of the Chinese people are actually in property. So this is an existential crisis. And I don't think Beijing can get out of this. It can sort of delay this problem, but not for very long.
So this is a state-owned enterprise, I assume?
It's private, actually. Evergrande was started by about, 20 years or so ago by a private entrepreneur, as are many of the large property companies. And it has now gotten to the point where it's had a lot of state backing, a lot of state money, but now clearly it can't meet its obligations because in China's system, which is really abnormal because it's behind a strong currency wall, a lot of unsustainable activity could take place for a long time. And Evergrande expanded into a lot of different businesses. Right now, just doesn't have the cash to honor its obligations.
And I don't know how the culture works there, but I'm assuming once a private enterprise like this one fails, they're never really probably accepted again. That failure, it's not like the American idea of bust and boom. They're probably done, right?
Well, I think they're done. And the reason is they're not going through what would happen in the U.S., Chapter 7, Chapter 11, bankruptcy reorganizations or failure. What's happening right now is that the Chinese central government and the provinces are actually starting to liquidate Evergrande's assets. And they're doing this informally. They hope that by doing this, it'll avoid a shock to the system. But we've got a lot of other big Chinese property developers that also are not making payments on their international bonds, which means that this is systemic. This is not just an Evergrande problem. This goes throughout China. And the reason why this is a political problem for China is that the international bondholders, they'll get stuffed. That's not a problem for Beijing. But what is a problem is that Evergrande has taken deposits from people to build apartments. It's not able to complete those apartments and deliver them, which means you've got hundreds of thousands of people across China who are going to be really angry. And some of them have actually started to protest. So this is a political problem for the regime, especially given the magnitude, because the problems here are so big, Matt, that it could take down the Chinese economy, the financial system, the banking system, and maybe even the political system.
So the Chinese economy has always had a long tradition of rapid growth, and that's one of the things that the regime has used to placate the people and to hopefully keep political opposition, kind of more at a boiling or at a simmer point. If you have the economy start to falter like this, which will result in some widespread political disruptions, what does this mean vis-a-vis the Olympics and this whole question about boycotting the regime over their abominable human rights record?
Yeah. The boycott of the Olympics, the diplomatic boycott that the Biden administration announced yesterday, is really interesting, Matt. It's a step in the right direction, but hardly sufficient.
Right? It's like a baby step.
Little. It's a baby step. What was really interesting was that Jen Psaki, when she announced this yesterday, said China is committing genocide and other crimes against humanity. Now, that is a serious charge. Now, not sending diplomats to the Olympics, well, yes, of course you would not send them when a country is engaged in atrocities. But then the question is, what is the Biden administration going to do beyond this? Because I think that once you have the leadership implicated in crimes like this, we've got to do something. For instance, Magnitsky Act sanctions on Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, and people at the top of the Chinese political system, I think is a minimum step. I mean, it's an important one, but again, not sufficient, because we're talking about a country that is engaged in crimes which are comparable, probably even worse than those of the Third Reich prior to the mass exterminations of 1941. We know that Uyghurs and Kazakhs and other Turkic minorities are being killed in these mass detention camps. There's credible reports of torture. There is forced organ harvesting for sure. Women are being raped as a matter of official policy. The government is organizing slave labor. So these are crimes which we cannot ignore. And I don't think the Biden administration has done nearly enough to recognize the situation.
What is going on with our administration here in America, the Biden administration? It seems like all the bad actors around the globe are teaming to be aggressive, with the expectation that a weakened Joe Biden can and will do little. What's your take on how the regime is viewing our president, Joe Biden?
Well, they certainly don't respect him. Now, every Chinese regime will challenge every new American president. That's without exception. But there's something else going on, and that is the chaotic withdrawal and the fall of Afghanistan. The disarray in the administration actually convinced Beijing that it could do whatever it wants. And we can see this from their propaganda narratives. The most important of those were that because the U.S. couldn't deal with the ragtag Taliban, that we had no hope in countering a magnificent China. The other propaganda narrative was that when China invaded Taiwan, it would fall within hours and the U.S. wouldn't come to help. Beijing actually said that the U.S. can't win wars anymore. And so I think it's been more provocative, not only with regard to Taiwan, but India and Japan and the Philippines. And at the same time, we've got Russia with 100,000 troops on the Ukraine border. You know, we can see basically these two big aggressors move either in coordination or taking advantage of the aggression of the others. So this is one of those critical moments when the international system could actually fall apart. And we could end up in war in many different locations, both ends of the Eurasian landmass.
Don't worry about it, Gordon, because currently the Pentagon is making sure our troops are trained in CRT and gender confusion. So we're focusing on all the right things to be ready for a two-front war. I say sarcastically.
Yeah, and it's not just a two-front war because remember, both Russia and China have proxies. So you have North Korea, Iran, Pakistan, Algeria, which means that South Korea, India, Israel, Morocco could be the victim of aggression from these proxies. So this is something that can spread very fast. You know, Matt, in the past, when we've had good policies, peace has broken out everywhere. When we have bad policies, the situation can deteriorate and has deteriorated across the board. Well, we're in one of those situations where things could fall apart. I'm not saying that they will, but I'm saying that there is an unacceptably high risk that they will. And we don't have an administration that I think at this point is moving vigorously enough to protect not only American interests, but the interest of everybody in this particular very, very critical time.
Chang, as we close this conversation, I've been reading articles about woke American companies, or basically international companies, that have attacked all the foundations of decent, of decency and the institutions that make our civilization strong here in America, the tenets of democracy, as they have supported every Marxist, communist, socialist entity, BLM moving forward with their corporate philanthropy. Yet they find themselves twisting themselves into pretzels trying to explain why it's perfectly fine to deal with the regime in China and to sponsor the Olympics in China. What's your take on this this hypocrisy in this corporate approach?
This is reprehensible. Today we've had the news that Apple was committing something like $275 billion or so into China. This becomes particularly relevant because Apple was caught using a subcontractor, Lens Technology, that was itself employing essentially slave labor. And we have this spectacle in Washington right now of Apple and other companies trying to water down or even to make sure that the Uyghur Slave Labor Act of Senator Marco Rubio doesn't pass. So essentially what Apple is saying is that, well, we should have slave labor, products made by slave labor in the United States. And by the way, this is not just slave labor. This is slave labor of a racial and religious minority. So, for instance, when you have, and I know that LeBron James is not a company, but he does represent a certain element of public opinion.
It does.
When he lectures the United States on racism, I mean, he endorses a product of a company that was employing through a subcontractor slave labor.
I think the hypocrisy that we see from celebrities, from athletes, from big corporate CEOs is unbelievable. And I tell you what, Gordon, you and I are board members here at CPAC. I say we hold these companies accountable, each and every one of them.
Absolutely. And let's start with Apple, because it has been also one lecturing us. And now we see that it is trying to take advantage of forced and slave labor.
Well, Gordon, thanks for your clarion voice on all these issues. Thanks for all your service to CPAC. We're going to see you in Orlando at the end of February, where everyone should go to our website at conservative.org and get your tickets. We'll be talking a lot about China, which we didn't have to, but we continue to have to. Thanks for joining us on CPAC Now America Uncanceled once again, Gordon.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Hey everyone, this is Matt Schlapp with CPAC, and it's my privilege to tell you that we've got a very important project that we have just announced, the First Amendment Fund. It's a brand new fund that we've created through our criminal justice reform efforts to raise money to take care of you, Americans who are being canceled and desecrated out there around the country. We know it just happened in Virginia, where parents were called domestic terrorists by the Biden administration, where people who just want to express their political views are canceled left and right. Now we have this terrible specter of a vaccine mandate where you can lose your job or be prevented from going to a restaurant or go to school according to your vaccination status. These are all the things that are happening in this country that are making people realize that America is in a fight to defend the principles that have made her great. If you want to be involved in this important effort, please go to conservative.org, click the link for the First Amendment Fund. Please donate to this C3 to help these victims across the country, including those who are just involved in politics, to make sure they have the legal representation they need to be able to live their great American life. Welcome back to CPAC Now America Uncanceled. We are now joined by one of these great conservative congressmen from the state of Georgia, where a lot of interesting things that we don't like have happened recently. Barry Laddermilk, who has a 96% ACU rating, one of the great stalwarts out there. How are you doing, sir? And thanks for joining us.
Well, I'm doing good. I mean, how could you not do well, getting this close to Christmas and, hopefully get a chance to put all this politics behind us for a few days and just enjoy family and friends, and to reflect on, the real reason that we're in this fight to save our country for those freedoms that our founders envisioned, that we would be able to do things like celebrating the birth of our Lord and Savior.
You're right. We are entering into the Christmas season, actually, in this moment of Advent, where we take time and really pray for what's to come, and Jesus' birth on December 25th, and being with our family and friends. And Matt, I hope we get to take a break. I'm really pushing hard for this break with the family come Christmas time. But let's jump in a little bit on what's happening in the news. And, one of the things I first heard is that we're seeing that David Perdue is looking to get into this gubernatorial race.
He's in.
Right?
He's in.
So what's your thought process on what's going to happen in this gubernatorial race in Georgia?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, Brian Kemp has a tremendous amount of support back home. Even a lot of Trump supporters are behind Brian. And look, there's no doubt he is the most conservative governor that I've been in my lifetime. And he's done a lot of tremendously good things for Georgia, getting us, limited. What level of shutdown we have was very limited during COVID, and then he reopened almost immediately. He's stood up to the federal government on a lot of the mandates, and so most Republicans are very pleased with the job he's doing. But then David Perdue, who was a very popular senator as well, is getting into this race, as well as Stacey Abrams. Has announced that she's getting in the race as well.
Isn't she already the governor? I'm so confused.
Well, this is the thing that amazes me. Financial or the House Administration Committee, we oversee federal elections, and she was an expert witness on why we need to have a federal takeover of elections. And she started off by just talking about how terrible Trump was and denying the fact that he lost, et cetera, et cetera. And I asked her, I said, have you conceded the 2018 gubernatorial election yet? And of course, she gave all the reasons why her election was wrought with fraud and was corrupt, but this one was not. So, yeah, she's never has conceded that she lost that election.
Let me ask you, Congressman, do you think Georgia's in a better place today in dealing with these elections? We just saw so many discrepancies back in 2020 during the presidential election and the senatorial elections as well. What's your sense? Do you think Georgia is going to be, just from an election security standpoint, a voter integrity standpoint? As we know, Stacey Abrams did her own shenanigans back in the day that truly created some chaos in Georgia.
Right. And the bill that was passed through the legislature, Brian Kemp has signed, will do a lot to keep from the shenanigans that Abrams and Cruz did before, from being able to do that again. So there is a lot of corrections. It is going to be harder to steal an election, harder to cheat in an election this time. And look, we've known for years and years and years that Fulton County, they always have major issues with elections. It's just a given in Fulton County. So at least now we know that it's going to be even harder for Fulton County to mess up this election. And it's ironic, if you go back in the last election, in the primaries, I was doing news hits because Fulton County was in the news because the Democrats were accusing Fulton County of suppressing votes and involved in fraudulent votes during the primary, the same election that then the Democrats thought the general election was fine.
We'll probably be here at CPAC with David Perdue in that primary because we think it's awfully important to just move forward on all of these election reforms and call the Democrats out. We appreciate your comments there, Congressman, because they're awfully important. You're really a leading voice on this whole question about stopping this ridiculously called Build Back Better plan. It's passed the House. I know we're not going to hold you responsible for the Senate because I wouldn't ever be responsible for the Senate. What is happening over there, and will they get these votes to pass this terrible bill?
Well, it's looking more and more optimistic every day that we go by, and you're not getting this bill through. Look, this is being handled through reconciliation, where you don't even have to have the 60 votes for cloture to bring this bill up. It bypasses that. All they need is 50 plus the vice president's vote to get it done. They can't even get there because this bill is so extreme. It does some of the craziest things that we've ever seen. When you just generically poll this thing, Americans are overwhelmingly against this Build Back Better plan because they know the price tag. They understand the inflation that is coming out of this. But if you go and ask them, hey, do you want, free community college? Some people are saying, yeah, sure, we'd like that. But then when they see how much their children are going to have to pay for it, they're like, no, we can pay for our own college. So it's hugely unpopular. And hopefully, even the Democrat senators over there are going to be hearing from their constituents during this holiday season of just about how they really feel about it.
Yeah, that's interesting, Congressman, because I really feel like the Democrats are pretty much placing their bets on getting this Build Back Better bill, done, and obviously spending a lot more of our taxpayer money. And then they're going to run on that come midterm elections because they really don't have much to run on these days. What's your sense in terms of what your Democratic colleagues are saying and what they're betting on as we go into these midterm elections next year?
Yeah, there's so much of what's happening right now is reminiscent of what happened with Obamacare. Okay, the hugely unpopular bill. Speaker Pelosi drove the bus off the cliff with her entire team on board just to get this thing done. And if you know, in 2010, there was the historic shellacking where Republicans took over in droves, and a lot of it was because of that one bill. We're seeing this same thing play out with Build Back America. Hugely unpopular piece of legislation, especially when you look at what's happening right now. This will be the most expensive Christmas for many people that they've ever had in their lifetimes because of inflation, the lack of goods, supply chain issues. All of these are specifically because of Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Chuck Schumer. They own this thing. And the more time that the Democrats are spending back at home, I think the more that they're hearing from their constituents, they don't like this. So I think if we get past over into the beginning of the new year, it may be even increasingly harder for them to get this thing passed in the Senate.
Well, that's good news. And keep pushing, Congressman Laddermilk, to make sure that doesn't happen. When we go out on the road, and we just came back from Florida and North Carolina, we hear about voter fraud and what happened in the last election overwhelmingly, as I'm sure you do.
Yeah.
And then we hear a lot about, Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, and this 1-6 commission. This commission, which is supposed to be investigating violence around the Capitol, but apparently won't allow anybody to talk about the decisions Nancy Pelosi made about the Capitol. And also, there's no really legislative purpose for this investigation to begin with. And of course, we know Kevin McCarthy couldn't even pick the Republicans who serve on there. What's the take in the Republican conference? Why aren't you guys just really, saying enough's enough? We just ought to ignore this committee altogether. It really has no legal standing, or do I have it wrong?
Well, that's kind of what we've done when we Kevin McCarthy wasn't, or the Republicans weren't allowed to choose our own members of this committee. When Nancy Pelosi rejected him, he said, well, then we're not going to participate. So Nancy Pelosi actually appointed the two Republicans that are on there, Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger. She appointed them. The Republicans have no representatives that we appointed to that commission because this is totally a political witch hunt, just like we've seen from the Democrats many, many times. And I think the real questions that we need to get answered is, how did these people get into the Capitol? What was the failure here on Capitol Hill? Who allowed these people to get in when we already know from the investigation we've done on our House Administration Committee, we know that the intelligence community knew of the planning of this. They knew who was engaged in it. They knew that there was a significant threat to the Capitol before January 6th, even on January 5th, when President Trump warned the Department of Defense and told them to get the National Guard ready to deploy on January the 6th. We knew that this was there. Who allowed them to breach the Capitol? Who is it that told the National Guard to stand down? We did not request them to come to the Capitol to augment the Capitol Police. These are the real questions that need to be answered, and that is not the questions that this commission are asking. I think this is another witch hunt just to pin this on Republicans, to pin it on President Trump. And I think they have nothing else to run on in the next election. And so I think all they're going to try to do is use this to tarnish some good people.
Yeah, they end up going after these young staffers, some of them who are just trying to put a stage together or work press advance, and being pulled in just because they're trying to find out gossip on senior White House officials and President Trump. And you're right, this is not I wouldn't say this is a bipartisan commission in any way. This is a partisan commission with two pseudo Republicans who are trying to destroy, I think, President Trump, any of his supporters, and it's just so sad that we are at where we are in the stage of this investigation without getting to the answers that you were talking about, Congressman, that are so important. I do want to go back to the economy, and you put out a tweet which I thought was short and sweet and to the point and just right on. And you said, inflation, or you tweeted, inflation is taxation. And I thought that was just so well put, because I think it's important for the American people, as I know so many people are feeling the effects of the Biden inflation. We know that many of his economic advisors have said, oh, no, this is just temporary. We're going to be fine by next year. But it doesn't seem for that to be the case. As someone who understands the economy so well, an economic expert, walk us through what we can expect going into next year with this inflationary crisis.
Well, I think you're going to continue to see more and more of the same as long as the legislation or the policies continue in the path they're going. The current administration, the Biden administration, took the philosophy, if Trump did it, it's bad. It doesn't matter what it is. That's why you're seeing this crisis at the border. You're seeing your gas prices high because of the policies that they put in of restricting fracking, restricting of new drilling, of shutting down pipelines. All of this has hurt America's production of oil. Now, since I've been in Congress, it was during the Obama administration, we lifted a 40-year ban on the exporting of American-produced oil. We had a 40-year ban that prohibited us from exporting any oil that we produced here, and we're the largest producer of oil products in the world. As soon as we lifted that ban, the United States became the most influential country on international oil prices. It was no longer OPEC. So we never had to go back to OPEC. We were controlling it by the free market system that we were in. Now with Biden, he's going to OPEC asking them to increase production to lower prices because we've given that authority away. When you pay people to stay at home and go to work, when you do things like removing work requirements from welfare, all right, when you're incentivizing people to not go to work and you have more jobs available than you have people on unemployment, there is no reason why we should have this economic problem. But what it's created is a supply chain issue. People are standing in line longer, waiting longer, getting less and paying more for it. It's really what you would get in a socialist society. And part of me thinks is, well, part of this, they like this inflation because they're really trying to push through socialism. And if we do have socialism in this nation, this will be the norm. So people need to get used to paying higher prices for less quality and taking longer. And we're going to continue to see this as long as we massively spend, as long as we put barriers in place and ridiculous mandates on employers where they can't get people back to work. You're just going to see more of this happen.
Yeah, and I'll add on top of that, the vaccine mandates. We just saw Mayor de Blasio, in his last minute push before he is pretty much kicked out of office, put in this vaccine mandate on private companies. Let me get your quick reaction to that. I think that it's just such a destructive way to basically discourage any economic activity and continue to destroy a great city.
Well, let's put it this way. One way of telling how extreme things are is when Black Lives Matter and Republicans agree on the same thing. And they are, from what I've learned, is they are opposing this mandate by de Blasio. Look, what the government needs to understand, everyone who is going to be vaccinated has been. You're not going to see a mass rush of people to come and get vaccinations. We're a free society. People make their own decisions, especially on their own health care, right? If people want to take the risk, if there's risk involved with it, they have the right to do that. They don't pose any additional threat to any other people, any other person out there, whether they're vaccinated or not. It's their own risk that they're taking. And so we have those freedoms. And quite frankly, if the government had just come out and said, hey, we're encouraging everybody to get vaccinated, you'd probably seen a whole lot more people get vaccinated than coming out and saying, you have to do this. A poll came out and told us that of the people in the workforce that hadn't been vaccinated, 70% said they will leave their current job instead of being forced to take the vaccination. This is just America. This is reality. You got to understand and respect freedom of others. You can't force people to do something just because the government thinks it's a good idea.
I couldn't agree with you more, Congressman Laddermilk. Thanks for all the great work and your fantastic votes in Congress. As I said, you're 96% ACU rating.
That's high.
Pretty good.
You're
We're going to
there.
see you in Orlando for CPAC at the end of February. Thanks for joining us today.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate all you do.